What would happen if you were just cooling off in your own pool, and suddenly the police showed up? But when the truth came out, everyone was left stunned. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you are watching from. The summer heat was relentless, making the shimmering blue waters of the backyard pool even more inviting. Darius Carter had just finished his morning coffee and was preparing to close the pool for routine maintenance. It was something he did every week, a simple task, nothing unusual. But today would be different. Because as soon as he stepped outside with his pool skimmer in hand, he noticed something off. Across the fence, standing with arms crossed and a phone in hand, was his neighbor Linda Pearson. And from the way she was glaring at him, Darius knew exactly what was coming. Another problem. Another false accusation. And this time, she would regret every second of it. Linda had lived next door to Darius for over 2 years, but in all that time, she had never truly accepted the fact that he belonged there. It did not matter that Darius had paid for his home in full. It did not matter that he had a successful career, an expensive car in the driveway, and a reputation for being friendly and professional. To Linda, he was still an outsider. And today, she had decided to remind him of that. Darius had just started pulling the pool cover over the water when he heard it. Linda's voice, sharp, loud, and dripping with fake concern. "Yes, hello? I need to report some suspicious activity." Darius froze mid-movement. "Here we go again. There's a man messing with the pool in the yard next door. I don't know if he lives there, but he looks out of place." Out of place. The words stung, but they did not surprise him. Because this was not the first time Linda had done something like this. And unfortunately, it probably would not be the last. This was not just a one-time misunderstanding. This was a pattern. A pattern of Linda calling the police for ridiculous, made-up reasons whenever she saw Darius existing in his own space. 3 months ago, she had called the cops when Darius had friends over for a barbecue, claiming it was a disturbance. Last summer, she had reported him for lingering in his car in the driveway. And now, she was trying to get the police involved because he was closing his own pool. Darius clenched his jaw, trying to keep his composure. He could have yelled at her. He could have argued. But instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording. Because this time, he was not letting it slide. Linda was still talking, still weaving a dangerous narrative. "He looks aggressive," she added, glancing at Darius with a smug expression. "I think he might be trespassing." Trespassing? On his own property? Darius let out a slow, controlled breath. Linda had no idea what she was about to walk into, because what happened next would be her biggest mistake yet. Within minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the neighborhood. 2 patrol cars rolled up, and uniformed officers stepped out, hands on their belts. Darius did not move. He stood still, phone still recording, waiting for them to hear Linda's version of events. And, as expected, she launched into full performance mode. "Thank you for coming," she gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just survived something traumatic. "That man was messing with the pool, and I don't think he belongs here." One of the officers turned to Darius, giving him a skeptical look. "Sir, can you explain what you're doing here?" Darius exhaled slowly. "Yes," he said, keeping his voice calm and firm. "I live here. I own this house. I was closing my pool for maintenance when she called you." Linda scoffed. "That is not true. I have never seen him here before." Darius smirked. "Is that so?" Then he pulled out his phone. Because what Linda did not know was that this entire encounter had just been recorded. And the moment he hit play, her expression changed completely. Because there, clear as day, was her voice, calling 911, lying about what she saw. And now, the officers were hearing every word. One of the officers exchanged a look with his partner. The entire tone of the situation shifted, because this was no longer about a suspicious person. This was about false reporting. Linda's face turned pale as the realization sank in. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice firm now, "we need to see proof that this man does not live here." Linda stammered. I don't have proof, but I know." "That's enough," the officer cut in. "Sir, do you have any ID or proof of ownership?" Darius smirked. He did not just have proof, He had receipts. Pulling out his wallet, he handed over his driver's license, which had his address printed on it. Then, just for good measure, he pulled up his home ownership documents on his phone. The officers took one look at it. Then they turned back to Linda. And what happened next? Completely flipped the situation. What happens next? The police officers were no longer looking at Darius like a suspect. Now, they were looking at Linda. Because false police reports were a crime. And within the next few minutes, Linda was about to face the consequences of her actions. Because Darius, he was done staying silent. And the way this ended would leave her absolutely speechless. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Just moments ago, Linda was in control, or at least she thought she was. She had called 911 with the confidence of someone who had done this before and gotten away with it. She had assumed the police would believe her without question, that they would approach Darius as the threat and her as the concerned citizen. But now, the entire situation was slipping through her fingers, because for the first time, she was the one being questioned, and she was not prepared for it. Officer Reynolds, the senior officer on the scene, finished scanning Darius's ID and home ownership documents. Then he turned back to Linda, his expression stern. "Ma'am, you said you were reporting a trespasser?" he asked, his voice noticeably sharper now. Linda hesitated, her lips pressing together. "Yes," she blurted out. I thought he was trespassing. I have never seen him before, and—" "That is interesting," Officer Reynolds cut in. "Because according to these documents, Mr. Carter has owned this home for over 3 years. Linda blinked rapidly, her face flushing red. Three years?" she echoed, her voice suddenly much quieter. The other officer, a younger man named Officer Patel, crossed his arms. "Ma'am, do you mean to tell us that you have lived next door to this man for 3 years and never once noticed him?" Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, because the truth was painfully obvious now. She had noticed him. She had noticed him enough to call the police on him multiple times in the past. She had noticed him every time she glared at him from her porch. But now that she was being called out for it, she had nothing to say. Darius speaks up. The moment of power. Darius had been silent up until this point, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to see how far Linda would dig herself into this hole. But now it was time to set the record straight. He took a step forward, his voice calm but commanding. "You have lived next to me for 3 years, Linda. 3 years." Linda flinched at the sound of her name coming from his mouth. 3 years of me mowing my lawn. 3 years of me having barbecues with friends. 3 years of me walking in and out of my own front door, while you stood right there on your porch, staring at me. Officer Reynolds raised an eyebrow at that last part. Linda looked like she wanted to disappear. "So tell me," Darius continued, "how is it that you have never seen me before?" Silence. Because there was no answer. At least, not one she could say out loud. And that was when everything changed. Officer Reynolds let out a long sigh before looking at his partner. Then he turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, we take false police reports very seriously." Linda visibly stiffened. "I was just—" "No," the officer said firmly. "You were not just concerned. You were making baseless accusations against a man standing in his own backyard, and that is a problem." The color drained from Linda's face. Darius could see the fear creeping in now because she knew exactly what was coming next. "If we find a pattern of repeated false reports from this address," Officer Patel added, "there could be legal consequences. Do you understand that?" Linda swallowed hard. I did not mean—" "You did," Darius interrupted, his voice cutting through her excuse like a knife. "You meant every single second of it. And now, you are facing the consequences." For the first time in her entire life, Linda Pearson was being held accountable. And she was not handling it well. The neighborhood watches, and the truth spreads. As the confrontation unfolded, a few other neighbors had started gathering nearby. They had heard the sirens. They had seen the police cars pull up. And now, they were witnessing everything. A couple from 2 doors down stood on their porch, exchanging knowing glances. The old man across the street, who had always been polite to Darius, let out a low whistle. Because they all knew Linda. They knew how she was. And now, They were finally seeing her get exposed. Darius could hear someone muttering in disbelief. She really called the cops for no reason again? Man, she is out of control. Linda heard it too. She could feel the eyes on her, the judgment in the air. And for the first time ever, she was the one being looked at like she did not belong. Linda tried one last time to save face. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay, she pleaded. Darius chuckled. But it was not a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that said he had heard enough. No, Linda, he said, shaking his head. You wanted to make sure I knew my place. And now? You just found out that my place is right here where I belong. Linda looked away, her face burning with shame, because there was no more pretending now. She had lost. And Darius? He had won. What happens next? The police had issued a warning. The neighbors had seen the truth for themselves. And Linda? She was about to face the biggest consequence of all. Because when this story got out, her entire reputation would go up in flames. And Darius was going to make sure of it. Because for once, the world was on his side. And the way this ended would be something Linda would never forget. Linda stood frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping her phone like it was the only thing holding her together. The same police officers she had called for help were now standing in front of her, issuing a stern warning. The same neighbors she had wanted to impress were now whispering behind her back, shaking their heads in disbelief. The same man she had tried to humiliate was now watching her crumble, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Because for the first time in her life, Linda Pearson was completely, utterly powerless. The police deliver the final verdict. Officer Reynolds sighed and flipped his notepad shut, his patience with Linda clearly wearing thin. Ma'am, he said, his voice sharp now. I will say this one more time. False police reports are a serious offense. If you continue this kind of behavior, we will have no choice but to escalate this legally. Linda's mouth fell open, her eyes wide. Legally? She stammered. Yes, Officer Patel chimed in. Which means a fine, possible charges, and let's not forget this will go on record. Linda visibly swallowed, her face growing redder by the second. Darius watched her reaction, arms crossed, waiting for her to finally absorb the reality of her situation. She had spent years thinking she could get away with treating people like this. Years. But now, she was learning a lesson she never expected. As the officers finished their warning, a voice cut through the air from the gathering crowd. So what now, Linda? Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Lopez, the elderly woman from 2 houses down. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, her expression somewhere between anger and amusement. Are you going to call the police on me next? Maybe because my grass is too long. A few neighbors laughed quietly, while others nodded in agreement. Linda turned bright red. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, she mumbled. Safe from what? Mr. Carter, another neighbor, spoke up. A man closing his own pool? You have lost it, Linda. More voices murmured their agreement. And suddenly, Linda realized just how badly she had messed up. Because now, she was not just a woman who made a mistake. She was the neighbor everyone had been quietly tolerating for years, and now they were done tolerating her. Darius let the moment hang in the air, savoring the irony. Because here, she was the same woman who had always looked down on him, always treated him like he did not belong. And now, she was the one who did not belong. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. You wanted me out of this neighborhood so badly, Linda. Linda did not answer. She was too busy staring at the ground, her face burning with humiliation. Darius smirked. But it looks like I am not the one who has to leave. Silence. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. Linda had burned every bridge in this neighborhood. And now, she was the outcast. As the police wrapped up their report, one of the younger neighbors, a teenage girl named Mia, pulled out her phone. You guys know this was all recorded, right? She asked casually. Linda's head snapped up. Recorded? Mia smirked. Yeah, live streamed actually. The whole thing. It is already on Facebook. Linda's face drained of color. She turned wildly, looking at the crowd, as if hoping someone would defend her. But no one did. Instead, people started pulling out their own phones, checking the video, shaking their heads. "Wow," someone muttered. "It has over 10,000 views already." Linda's knees nearly buckled. She had spent years controlling the narrative, spreading gossip, making herself look like the concerned neighbor while making Darius seem like a problem. But now, the truth was out there, and there was no erasing it. Desperate, Linda whirled toward Darius, her voice shrill. "You did this," she snapped. "You set me up." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I set you up? You mean I forced you to call 911 and lie? I forced you to say I was trespassing on my own property?" Linda shut her mouth, because, again, she had no answer. She had done this to herself, and now she was the villain of her own story. As Linda stood there, humiliated and fully aware of how bad things had gotten, the police gave Darius one final nod before turning to leave. Neighbors began drifting away, whispering to each other, still shaking their heads. And Linda? She was left standing alone. The very woman who had spent years trying to isolate Darius had now isolated herself. And that was the greatest irony of all. What happens next? Linda had lost her reputation, her influence, and the respect of her neighbors. But for Darius, this was just the beginning of something bigger. Because the next morning, something happened that no one expected, and it would change everything forever. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood had changed. It was not just the humiliation Linda had suffered. It was the fact that everyone now knew the truth and there was no going back. People had spent years either ignoring Linda's behavior or brushing it off as harmless paranoia. But now, they had seen her for what she really was, and no one was willing to defend her anymore. The video that ended everything. The Facebook video Mia had recorded, it had not stayed small. It had spread like wildfire, being shared across multiple community groups, news pages, and even Twitter. By the afternoon, it had over 1 million views, and the reactions were brutal. She really called the cops on a man for closing his own pool? This is disgusting. I hope the police actually do something about false reports like this. She could have gotten him hurt. What is wild is how calm this man stayed. I would have lost my mind. Someone find Linda's job and send them this. She needs to feel the consequences. Linda had no idea how bad it had gotten until she tried to go grocery shopping later that evening. It started the second she stepped into the store. People recognized her immediately. A woman near the produce section gave her a disgusted look before turning away. A cashier whispered to her coworker, both shaking their heads. Then, as Linda reached for a carton of milk, a voice rang out, "Oh wow, look who it is, the concerned citizen of the year." Linda froze. Slowly, she turned to see a man holding up his phone, smirking. He had the video pulled up on the screen. "Got anything to say, Linda?" he asked. A few people turned to watch, curious. Linda's hands clenched into fists. She turned and stormed out of the store, leaving her cart behind. Because suddenly, she was not just a nosy neighbor. She was the most hated woman in the community. A few days later, Linda received a letter in the mail. It was from the Homeowners Association, HOA, and when she opened it, her heart sank. Due to multiple complaints from residents regarding harassment and false police reports, the HOA has decided to conduct an official review of your actions. If the review finds that your behavior has contributed to the disruption of community harmony, fines and other consequences may apply. Linda's hands shook as she read it again. The HOA had never sent her anything before, but now they were going after her, and she had no allies left. Meanwhile, Darius was not done yet. Linda had spent years trying to make his life miserable, and he wanted to ensure she would never do it again. So he took legal action. He met with a lawyer and filed an official complaint with the police regarding the false 911 report. "This is a pattern," Darius explained. "I have records of her calling the police on me multiple times. I want to push for legal action." The lawyer nodded. "Good. Because she needs to understand that this isn't just a mistake, it is harassment." Within a week, Linda received another letter. But this time, it was from a law firm, a formal notice that Darius was taking action against her. Linda was officially trapped. With her reputation destroyed, the community turning against her, and a legal case now on her back, Linda realized something. She could not stay here anymore. She put her house up for sale within a month. A for sale sign went up on her lawn, and people whispered about it for weeks. Some people thought she was forced to move. Others believed she just could not handle the humiliation. Either way, by the end of the summer, Linda Pearson was gone. And Darius? For the first time in years, he could finally enjoy his own home in peace. A year after Linda's downfall, the neighborhood was different. Better. People were friendlier. There was no more tension in the air. Darius had become a respected figure, someone neighbors trusted and admired. And Linda? Well, no one ever really spoke about her anymore. She had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when prejudice meets consequences. And for Darius, that was enough. Because now, he had finally won. This is why we stand up for ourselves. Because the moment we let things slide, they will keep happening. If you believe in standing against injustice, subscribe for more powerful stories.